You can't keep me cooped up in here, okay? I am a peacock. You gotta let me fly.
Hello there. This is the Poppycock podcast, where I'm not an expert and the topics don't matter. So just enjoy it or don't. It's a podcast. It's not going to save your life. Now, unless you've been living underneath a rock, you will know that a very anticipated game called Cyberpunk 2077 is on its way to releasing, and it's going to completely change. Well, I was going to say it's going to change our lives, but really sitting at home and watching TV a lot is kind of what most people have been doing during the lockdown anyway. So it's really just going to change what we're doing while we're here and hopefully improve the quality of what we're ingesting. But with the announcement that Cyberpunk was going to come out back in, I think it was sometime in 2013. The trailer came out the same week that the first trailer for Zack Snyder's Man of Steel released. I remember this because I was in the field, in the military, and I had to climb up on top of a series of shipping containers to get enough service to watch it. Because, I like comic books and I like cyberpunk things. However, ever since then, and with the information that Keanu Reeves is involved in said franchise, things have gotten a little messy. People seem to be under the assumption that all you need is neon lights and scantily clad women and maybe a John Wickism, and suddenly you have arrived at Cyberpunk. And that's not what Cyberpunk is. Cyberpunk is not the normal world, but with neon lights. Neon lights are oftentimes present, though. So allow me to go in depth just a bit on what Cyberpunk actually is. Some of the elements of what makes Cyberpunk is a world that is kind of broken. Things have not gone according to plan. A war happened, a natural disaster, corruption. There's a lot of dealing with regret and missed opportunities and consumption. I mean, you look at a lot of big name Cyberpunk movies. You've got your Blade Runners, Alita Battle Angels up in there. I would like to also mention Mute. Is there Elysium? The Total Recalls, Dread. You've got a running theme of we had something and we had the chance to do it right, and for one reason or another we screwed it up. And now the world you're left in is sort of a shell of what it used to be. Meaning that Cyberpunk has almost this nostalgic feeling, the same way that, when you're in high school and you have a bad breakup and you think back to it, you're longing for what could have been, what could have happened. And Cyberpunk is too cool to tell you that it's still hung up on its ex, but it is. And there's just a constant feeling of bittersweet, because even when the hero wins, which isn't every time and sometimes isn't even that often, depending on the medium and who's in charge of the Cyberpunk media that you're consuming, it's not a victory that's going to save the world. It isn't Superman saving the day and now the sunshine is coming through the clouds and everything's going to be just fine. You aren't fighting to fix what's happened. You're just struggling to survive and not get worse. You want to break even. That's a victory. And I think it's easy to understand why people forget that Cyberpunk is oppressive in nature, because we want to feel good in what we watch. I mean, especially nowadays, you have enough bad stuff going on, you want to escape all of it. It's escapism. That's what sort of launched, cinema into what it is. In the Great Depression, you had people that were, greatly depressed, as the name would imply, and they just needed a way to forget about it. So comic books and illustration and the movie theater became the escapism for those people that needed to get out of there. I think it can be easy with Cyberpunk to want to make it a little bit cheerier. And, you just put an attractive woman in next to nothing, some futuristic textures and clothing, and you coat her in neon and you say, look, I made a cyberpunk thing. But you didn't. You just made softcore porn with a lot of color. Good for you. And this is nothing against the people who take every single freeze frame of Keanu Reeves' life, add on some cybernetic attachment, and then coat it in 18 layers of color. If you enjoy that, hang on. My wife's dog is currently trying to bury a chewy peanut butter treat in the back of my pants. Good God, Roxy. Personal boundaries. Buy me a drink first. Anyway, it's nothing against those people that are doing that. You're having fun, you're creating art, and sometimes just making something feels good, even if not a lot of people will enjoy it. I mean, otherwise, why would everyone have a podcast, myself included? It's just fun to make things. But don't go out there and try to tell me that it's cyberpunk. It might be inspired by science fiction, but it honestly has more in common with the retrofuturism that you saw in the 60s and 70s than anything now, where everything was circular and neon and had bizarre shapes. The only difference is that we've added more, hedonistic tendencies of, prostitution and murder and drug abuse, and now we know about virtual reality, and so we can put on a VR headset. I want to talk about Upgrade, one of my favorite and lowest budget cyberpunk movies. And the movie isn't itself about, neon and killer synth beats, It's about a guy and a girl, and he loses the girl, and he is paralyzed. And he gets a chance by a guy who he had been repairing cars for. He's like the Steve Jobs of the universe. And he's like, I have a chip that I can put in your back, and you can walk again. But you can't tell anyone I did it. And then it turns out that that thing can also help him track down the people that killed his wife and paralyzed him. And he gets to fight them. And there's this whole vast conspiracy, and it's dark and it's sad, and it's not a happy movie. I mean, obviously, but I think people look at the John Wick franchise, which is stylized and it's awesome, and it does have the Keanu Reeves connection. Hello there. Can I help you, Roxy? He's doing the Terminator stare down. Do you want your stick you tried to put in my pants? Thank you. Enjoy that. Don't spend it all in one place. Anyway, Upgrade is not a feel-good movie, and I think because of the really stylized, wonderfully produced John Wick movies, people just assume that Keanu Reeves in a room that has neon doing morally gray area things equals cyberpunk. All you have to do is throw in some robots or like a cybernetic arm. But there's elements of conspiracy and oppression and corporate control. The fact that everyone is trying to escape, because if you look at cyberpunk, there's a whole lot, especially post 80s, when we started thinking about the digital world. You're plugging yourself into a virtual reality where life can be better. Not too different from the way that people play video games at the end of a long day or a hard week. Brandon Routh, Superman actor, said that he became a video game addict after his career was in shambles. We already do some of these things, and cyberpunk is just a way to talk about them without having to admit that we're talking about those problems. It's sort of like a dark potential future that is bad enough that we're scared and we are aware of it so that we can avoid it, but it's also cool enough that we can stomach seeing a story about it, or it asks us cool enough questions about our lives that we're okay with how dark and depressing it got. I mean, Alita Battle Angel is another cyberpunk movie, and on the surface you would think it's just a sci-fi movie, but it has robots and floating cities and corrupt hierarchies and government oppression and conspiracies, and it's sort of like there's vegetables and there's fruit, and not all vegetables and fruit are as cut and dry as you'd expect. They don't all taste within the same bracket. So Alita isn't the most stereotypical cyberpunk, but it falls underneath the purview given the content that it discusses. Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049 are probably some of the most famous cyberpunk anything. And if you'll notice, it's a lot more cyber than it is punk. I mean, there's synthwave and there are like criminals and there's stuff like that, but it's more of a art house sci-fi adventure that just tackles the same topics of cyberpunk. And I think that's something cool about the cyberpunk game, based, of course, on the tabletop sort of Dungeons and Dragons-esque role-playing cyberpunk franchise. That's just, it's a world that deals with all these questions about things, and it has the punk element of cyberpunk. It's got, the sort of 90s punk rocker, fight the system, spit and moxie that it takes, and it puts that into a chromed out world where there are, even more dangerous things. I mean, most of the gangs you have to worry about in the Cyberpunk franchise, of the video game and of the board game, the role-playing game that it comes from, I mean, they're backed by corporations, or they're funded by corporations, or they started off as failed militias started by a corporation, because greed and corruption and monopolies and an abuse of the capitalist system is what births a lot of cyberpunk themes. Because, we as people, we look at business and it doesn't always make sense. We look at the world and we wonder if we're doing the right thing. We look at ourselves and we wonder, how much of ourselves and our information are we giving away? Is it too much? And those are questions that are difficult to nail down, but in a universe that's fictional, you can definitively say where those lines of too much and too little is, or you can at least introduce a character that has a strong opinion on where those lines are. And then you have something to talk about. And then you can either agree with what that movie or the book or video game said about the world and where that line is drawn, and you can either agree with it and now you have that to apply to yourself, or you can disagree and you've now figured out that, no, I don't think that's the limit. I think that this is acceptable. And it asks questions, and I think that's what makes Cyberpunk so relatable, is it's just a caricature of our real world experiences. Ready Player One is an entire, book and movie based on the concept of people that want control over this expansive digital, essentially, world to live in. It's it's like an MMO, but it's, for the sake of storytelling, it's seen as a lot more interesting than like World of Warcraft or Star Wars: The Old Republic. It's more interactive, you move your hands and it works just right. It's like you have your own digital avatar and you can do anything, and it is the ultimate form of escapism, which is kind of funny because, it's books were in a form of escapism as well as information transfer, and then film and TV sort of took the place, and now film is talking about the subjects from a book that is itself discussing virtual reality, which is another layer of it. It's sort of like this weird, multi-layered inception of how we choose to escape our real world lives while talking about the things that actually affect us. Ghost in the Shell. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge anime guy, so I didn't see the original, and I'm not a Scarlett Johansson fan because, look, I'm just gonna say it. If your main actress cannot say Winter Soldier without looking like she's having a stroke trying to get those syllables out, she's not a good actress. I get it. She's attractive to some people. I can kind of see it in some movies. It's just, it doesn't work for me. I'm not a Scarlett Johansson fan. Bodysuit looks pretty cool. I think the set design of the costuming, the lighting, it wasn't super saturated with color. It was, believable. But it wasn't good enough for me to want to actually watch it. And judging by the reviews, I feel like I'm not the only one who felt that way. You look at the movies like Moon and Mute, which are made by, I forget his name, but he's David Bowie's son, Duncan Jones. And it's, one is about a guy on the moon who is the only man there, and he's waiting for his time to be up, and he just maintains the machines that harness moon rocks. And then he wakes up after an accident, and there's another him there, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And it was more fun to watch before Kevin Spacey was a known rapist, because he does voice a robot. And then again, I would argue that if Kevin Spacey's in any type of cyberpunk literature that you're consuming, it almost makes it more authentic, because monsters have power in the cyberpunk universe, so why wouldn't he? But it's talking about, is it ethical to have a guy that you're essentially putting clone after clone after clone out with a limited lifespan, so you don't have to worry about paying for them to go on? And then what does it say about the original guy who gave his DNA to be cloned? Did he know they were going to do this to him over and over again, that they would give him his memories? What are the ethics of that? And then Moon looks at a cyberpunk world through the lens of a guy who was Amish, which is just bizarre. And sort of his navigation of, insanely perverse people and the use of technology, and his dying to connect with a woman and express his love for her, but he can't get the auditory, repairs that he needs to give him a voice again after sustaining an injury, because that would be against his belief system as an Amish guy. And it's just like, it's a bizarre setup, and it's Paul Rudd's bushiest mustache is present in that movie. And they give you characters that are nice, and they give you characters that are mean, and the good guy doesn't always win, and the bad guy doesn't always win. And sometimes, even if one of those people does win, afterwards they give you a chance to look at the world and you realize what that victory or loss actually did for them. And I think people kind of like to forget that. They like to forget that Cyberpunk isn't just John Wick. It isn't just bright lights and electronic music. And those things are cool, and those things are oftentimes there, but they're not the definitive backbone of what it spreads from, you know? Cyberpunk was sort of created and built upon so that people could fight the system or talk about how oppressed they are or discuss Orwellian, control over people's lives in a way that people who don't want to admit that that's the direction your life is going will read it, and then they have those thoughts in their mind, and then when someone's asking them for their data, no questions asked, like just give it to me and don't worry about it, they wouldn't have received that information about the corruption of that before, but now they're primed to think that maybe this could be used incorrectly, and now they're aware of the threat. And now you're informing people. Now you're giving people a chance to come to their own conclusions. And that's good. I would argue that the PlayStation exclusive Detroit Become Human falls underneath the purview as well. It's sort of like a weird riff on Blade Runner almost, with androids being second-class citizens. They were very heavy-handed in that it was like a racist thing. They're like, oh, droids go to the back of the bus. I'm like, but despite its heavy-handed flaws, it's still a really good look at what happens when you have virtual help, when you can grow people, or, cybernetic versions of people, and you build them to be giants, and they can do heavy labor for you, or be security, or a bouncer. What happens when you have ones that are built as prototypes that have more intelligence, And Westworld, the series, danced around the themes of Cyberpunk while set in Western and Japanese settings. And then in the third season, they just jumped to their version of the real world, which was Cyberpunk. And there was neon, but there was strong, authoritarian, concrete structures like you'd see from the fallen Soviet Union, just monoliths of gray, and they had hyper intense, very intricate corporate buildings that would emulate organic life and their structure with the shapes and the colors and the curves. And that's the type of thing that companies try to emulate in modern architecture, to be like, we're so friendly and we're so nice, and at the same time, they're listening to you through your iPhone and through your watch and selling your data to 18 different companies, making so much money that, it's insane. And then what's your end of the deal? You get more targeted ads. And I'm not gonna lie, targeted ads, they do help. I've had ads before where I'm like, I didn't know this thing existed, and it is something I could use. This is helpful. But you have to think about the ethics of it. Does the comfort of having things you might have not found organically delivered to your life, is that worth giving people information on who you are as a person? And I think more outgoing people might find themselves more at ease with that, whereas people who are more private dislike it. My wife was describing to me in great detail the ins and outs of what makes each stethoscope brand the best in the medical field, and the different types of it, the gauge, the way the sound works through it, the different settings, what happens when someone steals them, and she was name-dropping name brands left and right. I've never once looked for anything medical on any of my accounts on any device ever. I haven't even talked about it until she brought the topic up, because that's her career. The next day, I was getting ads for Littmann stethoscopes on my Instagram feed. And I think that, without a shadow of a doubt, proves that those things are listening. Something within my system was hearing those phrases and those brands spoken about and was like, okay, user 8513 is interested in stethoscopes, so let's push medical gear towards him. So let's push stethoscopes. And it wasn't like face masks for a virus survival thing, which might be more readily, advertised these days. It was just stethoscopes, and it was things for stethoscopes, things that I would never in a million years have even thought to look up, until my wife mentioned some of them one night while I was like browsing Reddit or on Pinterest, and it makes you wonder who is selling you out. And that's a big topic of Cyberpunk. So whether it's, you know, Deckard, or you've got the guy from Upgrade whose name escapes me, but the dude looks just like Tom Hardy, and I'm gonna go ahead and say that Upgrade is the Venom movie that you didn't know you wanted, because Venom was the Venom movie that I didn't want. You know, it's a symbiotic relationship between man and machine, going on a quest that kind of stretches both of them out of their comfort zone, and it has a great series of twists and amazing choreography, and it's just dark, and people are not nice, and it's funny about it. Like, there are moments of levity, and that's fine. It's okay to make it. Doesn't have to feel like a Zack Snyder film when you watch Cyberpunk, you know? It can make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you happy, it can make you think, or it can just be fun to look at. But I'm really sick of people jumping into the shallow end of the pool and saying that they know how to swim. Pretty lights and metal things does not make Cyberpunk. You know, it isn't necessarily the flying cars or virtual reality or holograms or corrupt politicians. It's not necessarily any one of those things, but those things do pop up often. There's a joke a guy told me when I was in the army. He said, not everyone with a mustache is a sex offender, but every sex offender will have a mustache. Weirdly, I feel like that applies to Cyberpunk in several ways, you know? Not everything with neon, not everything with robots, not everything with virtual reality or corruption or a near future look at something is going to be Cyberpunk. But Cyberpunk will almost always have some element from that category in it. I mean, look at the difference between sci-fi and cyberpunk. Sci-fi is where you get your Star Treks, you know, you get Lost in Space, you get all these really cool sci-fi stories, and they're more optimistic, they're more upbeat, and, you know, they have like a cleanliness to them, and I think a lot of those also aim for the future that we wish we would go towards, where it's almost a utopia instead of a dystopia, where things are going, you know. I think the more realistic science fiction does say that, hey, there's still struggle, there's still strife, it's not easy to get to the end of the road where there's a utopia, but they're aiming for it, and they are clearly on track to more or less be on their way to success in that area. And I think that it's the inverse for Cyberpunk, where it's more or less a failed state, and you figured out your mistakes too late, and now, you know, everyone's wearing masks to scrub out the pollution from the air, and you live in small confined spaces with narrow slits for windows where you get light that only comes in from all the, you know, neon advertisements around you. You know, you've got your data is sold to everyone. Altered Carbon does a great job of that, where when your body can literally be sold and your soul digitized into like a spinal cord and kept on cold storage indefinitely, and then someone else can pay money to have your body, or they can have a new body designed for them. And when you get put in a new body, it's like you don't have ad block on. So as you walk around, ads specific to those locations, just like real world geo-tracking, play over your eyes like you're in an augmented reality situation. And you have to pay extra money to have something put in that stops those ads from being bombarded into your face. Some would argue that augmented reality is cool. I mean, we've all played first-person shooters where you have the heads-up display, a compass, a waypoint, ammunition counter, things of that nature. But we don't want the equivalent of trying to load up a web page. You go to click on a link, and then the next, you know, it does that thing where the final ads load in and it knocks you out of the way a little bit, and you click on the ad and you're sent to a stupid website you never wanted. Imagine that, but everywhere you look. That would suck. That's a dystopia. That's a cyberpunk theme. You know? In fact, let's see what Google has to say. Cyberpunk is a genre of science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. Well, there you go. It's a world where conspiracy can more oftentimes than not be true, where truth and lies are so interchanged with one another that you can never tell who is telling you what, where the limits of what the human body is and what the human mind and soul are defined as are blurred, where there are advances in technology so quickly and by so many people that you don't have time to ask yourself, if this is right, or if this is too much, or if this is helping you, because the next great breakthrough might help you or your loved one have a better life. But just because they found a way to, fix your wound and, give you a prosthetic leg, or improve your solve dementia problems where now your brain has like a solid state drive plugged into it, maybe that just means that also they're going to make it where, soldiers get injured. Instead of kicking them out of the military, they just keep them going. They plug those holes back up and turn them into Terminators. Maybe now people are going to cheat in the corporate world by having tons of computers put into their minds so they can run numbers even faster, and they're at the top of their game. And there's no way you can keep up with them in a corporate culture or in life unless you also start upgrading yourself. And then at what point do you become more machine than man? Science fiction has always been about asking questions and hypotheticals and what if scenarios, and it's been for fun, it's been for exploration, it's been for what people think the world might be or could be or hopefully isn't. And sometimes it's just for fun. But when you want to talk about the things that we're afraid of and the things that affect our world today in a tone that people are more comfortable with, you turn to Cyberpunk. And I think that's what is so fun about especially the new Cyberpunk 2077 game coming out, is you have so many options and choices that it can feel like you're living another life. And part of the escape of a video game is you can do the things you wouldn't normally get to do. If a guy is a jerk to you at work, you have to put up with it. But hey, a guy's a jerk to you at work in a video game, you can deal with that however you like, and it will not affect your career, because you can turn off the game and go back to your life where you let Stanley be a dick to you, and things are still fine. You still have your job, and he's still the worst. But you had a chance to express how you wanted to. You got to live an alternate version of what you wanted to do to that person. So it's just food for thought. Not every Instagram and DeviantArt artist out there who found a picture of Keanu Reeves, put sunglasses on him, and bathed it in neon is making cyberpunk. And it's nothing against them. If you like that art style, if you like making that, go for it. That is just fine and dandy. But don't expect everyone to think that it's cyberpunk, because it isn't. Because cyberpunk isn't as much a visual language as it is like a thematic one, And certain visuals repeat themselves over and over again. And now we've had enough cyberpunk content that we can sort of identify based on shapes and textures and color palettes that might be what that is. But it's not a guarantee, So for anyone out there making anything cyberpunk related, or who likes cyberpunk, or who is just dipping their toes into the world of it, you got your Johnny Mnemonics out there. You got all kinds of content for years that you can dive into. It won't always be happy-go-lucky, but I think some of my favorite cyberpunk content has that gallows humor of the world is ending, but I'm going to make a laugh out of this moment right now, and I'm going to sort of laugh at the absurdity of my situation, and then I'm going to grit my teeth, I'm going to get the crap knocked out of me, and then I'm going to get up, and I'm going to try again in whatever I'm doing. Because I think there's something to be said if Deckard can go up against these conspiracies and do these questionable things and witness these things that changes his view on the world, and then go on with his life. How difficult can it be for us to do the same in a world that isn't quite as corrupt or quite as terrible? Or at least, it's fun to at least tell ourselves that it's not quite as corrupt. I think that as much as it can be dark and discouraging, and the punk of it kind of comes up to clash against it, to say that someone will always fight against what we perceive as injustice, that someone will always rebel, there will always be that fighting spirit that makes us fume and that keeps us from feeling claustrophobic, that when things get too dark and people push you too far, that you'll push back and other people will join you. That's an element of it too. And I think that, weirdly enough, it's uplifting to think that you're about to snap and the world seems like it's upside down, but knowing that you are not alone, and that there are people who don't even speak the same language, who are in a very different point in their life, that if they're pushed they'll be right alongside you fighting for the same change that you are. And that's Cyberpunk, you know? It's not just robots and hookers and lasers. It's the constant battle between oppression and rebellion. And that sounds really dumb and preachy and really boring, but I think all the games and books and movies and TV shows we've had prove otherwise. I think it connects with us. And I think if I have to see one more person take a screenshot and run it through a filter and say #Cyberpunk, I'm gonna snap. So please, God, think before you do that. Again, if you like it, that's fine, but well, now I need to go play a video game where I can express my aggression and not actually hurt anyone. Sort of like plugging into VR. Oh, Cyberpunk, you are nearer to us than we care to admit. There are self-driving cars and AI assistants. Boy, life is weird. I hope you enjoyed talking about Cyberpunk, or at least listening to me talk about it. If you didn't, it's kind of weird that you sat around this long, but I respect that you're willing to listen to an outside opinion.
Wake the f up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
Well, we won't be seeing him again.